to get started this morning, hi, my name is Betty DuBois, and I am a product marketing manager at Endace. And we're going to go ahead and look inside the TCP Handshake this morning. I have trace files available for you if you want to go ahead and download examples to work with, or we can go live. If you can get on the Wi-Fi, good luck with that. I had a challenge this morning. So if you're on the Wi-Fi and you just want to go live, sometimes that's just the easiest way. And if not, and you want to download example trace files, we can do that as well. Okay? So our agenda is to look at the goals of the TCP Handshake, to look at beginning sequence numbers, how they're used, and to look at the options. One of the biggest reasons that we're going to focus on the TCP Handshake is because so much troubleshooting in TCP starts with that. If I don't see the handshake, if I don't see some of the options that are negotiated, if I don't see the timing involved with how long it took, then troubleshooting the rest of the conversation is just that much more difficult. It's not impossible, but it's a lot more difficult. So our goal is to go ahead and see the beginning of the conversation and to know what the expectations should be. All right, that's our whole purpose. Now, so what we need to do, go ahead, and if you've got your laptops with you, and I see quite a few people have got their laptops on the lap, go ahead and let's start a nice fresh capture in Wireshark. Is everybody downloaded the 1.1 with all the new pretty toolbar? You guys like the buttons, the new buttons? I think they're cool, you know. And it was pretty funny when they first started going through back and forth, you know, what should the new buttons be? And I got an example of one set, and start a capture was red. Yeah, because that's logical. And so I was very excited when they changed this, like, okay, so, green means go, red means stop. Yay, thank you. So I was glad to see that these were the ones eventually picked. But you want to go ahead and start a nice fresh capture. All right. I'm going to use a trace file that I captured last year during the same talk, just to make it a little easier for me. But I want you to start a nice fresh capture. All right, let me go back over to my slides. And using your favorite FTP client, you can use a browser, you can use FileZilla, you can go to the DOS prompt, I don't care what you do. But using your favorite FTP client, I want you to go up to FreeBSD, just happens to be one that I know will take anonymous as a username and password, and because my goal is to have a different protocol besides HTTP. Because you probably have already got browsers open, you've already got other stuff going on, you probably got your email up, and I want a different protocol to work with, make it easier to filter, all right? So go ahead, open up a browser or open up FileZilla, go on up to FreeBSD, log in, use anonymous, put your password as whatever you want, and then pick any of the document, let it load, and then go back to the trace file. So I'll give you 4 seconds, let you do that. Okay. Now, if you've already downloaded them, you can use the Owen example. Okay. Now, so once you've gone ahead and you've done that, your goal is to go ahead, now you've probably got down here in the display, down at the bottom, you've probably got, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of packets. Make sure for me, I'm not I know it's the default, but I always turn it off. I turn off auto scroll so they're not flying across. It's kind of nice when you're capturing and you want to make sure that you see the packet as it's coming in. But then now when you want to go and find one later and they're scrolling and you're like, I can't click it fast enough. So feel free to turn auto scrolling off. Okay. Find yourself an FTP packet. Any of the ones that's there in the protocol column, say FTP. Grab one, do a right click on it, and come on down to follow TCP stream. Greatest thing ever invented in Wireshark. Okay. So we've got a single stream to work with. When you're looking at a handshake or you're looking at any TCP conversation, you're doing any TCP troubleshooting, the last thing you want to do is look at 15 or 20,000 TCP connections at the same time. It'll make you insane. All right, don't start with that. You've been doing it for a long, long time. I've been doing nothing but protocol analysis now for, I don't know, 15, 16 years. And it's still a lot easier for me to look at one single conversation at a time. All right, it's easier, okay? So when you're looking at sequence numbers, you're looking at options, you're looking at acknowledgements, you're looking at bytes in flight. Look at one conversation at a time. Don't make yourself insane. Filter. So you follow TCP stream. And of course, you know, we pick FTP because it's in beautiful clear text and it's so much fun to see it in a follow TCP stream dialog box, okay, because it shows everything that you've ever wanted to know, right? But our goal is to go ahead and have a single conversation, and I want to make sure that I've got the beginning of the conversation. So if you went ahead and you started your FTP and then you started capturing, you don't have the handshake, log out, log back in, do it again, because you've got to have the handshake, all right? Sir? You can be on any packet in the conversation when you follow TCP stream. You can be the beginning, middle, end, doesn't matter.
But it's assuming that the beginning of the conversation is somewhere in your trace, right?
Well, no, not necessarily. Yeah, that's my, yeah. So the question was, and in here, let me say again, here we go, because remember, I'm recording over here. So the question was, do you have to have the beginning of the, you have to be on the beginning of the conversation when you follow TCP stream? And so the answer is no. And then the question was, when you follow TCP stream, will you necessarily get the handshake? Is that your question, Ed?
Well, does the beginning of the handshake have to be in the packet stream?
Well, when you follow TCP stream, you're going to get whatever's there. And so if you were not capturing when the handshake happened, you've got to capture it again.
Okay.
All right. So who uses NFS? Okay. So yeah, seriously, you know, those things are mounted for like days, weeks, months. You know, that handshake is long gone. All right, and so even if you're doing, you know, long-term packet storage, you know, that handshake has, you know, left the building, you know, 6 months ago. So then it's a little more challenging, especially when you're doing Windows scaling and trying to figure out what factors are being used. So that's why I say it's so important to get the handshake first, all right? It's not impossible to do it without it. It's just a lot harder. Okay. So now as you're looking at your trace, what I want to make sure is now in the info column, there in the beginning, you've got a SYN and a SYN-ACK and an ACK. So there's our beautiful three-way handshake. So SYN for synchronize, FIN for finish, in case you ever wonder what that was too. But SYN for synchronize, ACK for acknowledgement. Yeah. So you follow TCP stream, you've got it filtered down to a single conversation. Let's go ahead and start looking at the first TCP packet. So I'm at packet number 1 in my trace. Come on down into the detail section, open that up. Now, oh, I realize here, just 1 second, because I realize that that does not quite, there we go. That's a little better. There, okay. I'm like, I can't see my stuff on the left because it gets cut off on the screen. So, pardon me. So my first packet, we start off with our port numbers. So since this is the SYN packet, and when I say that, I mean it's a SYN without an acknowledgement, so it's the beginning of the conversation. In this example, you know, we went out to FTP, we know we went to port 21, we know that that's the destination daemon that we want to talk to. But in a lot of environments, if I'm looking at custom written software or it's using some type of port number that's not well known, and I'm not really sure, and they both look like they're ephemeral ports to me. They both look like ports that are dynamic or short-lived. I'm not really sure who's the server, who's the client when I get the trace file. Always looking at the SYN packet, clients start conversations, servers are the destination. So if you look at the packet that only has a SYN in it, you'll always know who the server is. All right? So even if it's a server who's acting as a client because we're in a middle tier environment, you'll always be going towards, the initial SYN is always going towards the server in that conversation. And that's just the easiest way to tell if you've got port numbers that you're like, I don't even know what these numbers are, and they certainly don't make any sense to me, and Wireshark doesn't have a nice little thing in parentheses that says a word there, okay? So our example is FTP, so it makes it a little easier. And then, coming on down, one of the big reasons that we've got the handshake, some of the things that we're trying to do here in the beginning of the handshake, stand by, let me flip back over. There we go. One of the things that we're doing, or some of the things that we're doing, is we're looking for, is that port open? At the very basics of the handshake is, are you listening for that service? So I send information to port number 21. What I'm looking for is a response besides TCP reset. Okay, I'm looking for a yes. I'm looking for a SYN-ACK back. Then the next thing that I'm looking for is to tell you what port number I'm going to listen for the response on. So what port number am I opening up in my stack for the responses coming back? So what if, they call it an ephemeral port, it means short-lived, but it's the client's dynamic port number. So they've gone ahead and opened that port, and they're listening for that response from that server. The IP address and the port number together make what they call a socket. So let's say that, all right, so Ed, since you asked the question, I'm going to pick on you for the rest of the day. So let's say that Ed is our server, and I send it to destination port 21, and I'm coming from port 1234. If all of a sudden Charles goes ahead and sends me a packet to 1234, it came from a different IP address, and therefore I'm not going to bring that in. I did not open up that socket. I opened up the socket for Ed's IP address plus 1234. Right? So that's what the client is doing. Then we want to go ahead and tell both sides what sequence number we're going to start counting the bytes on. So TCP is a stream-based protocol. We're going to send data back and forth. Both sides get to talk. It's one of the reasons I did the FTP, because both sides will talk back and forth together in the control piece. And it's not just a straight download that we're looking at. We're looking at the control part first. And so if I want to go ahead and tell you that I'm going to start counting at byte count number 4,857,399, all right, I don't start counting at 0, because then it's too easy for someone to slip in and what they call hijack the session. So I use a random-based number. But from then on, every byte that I send to you, when you acknowledge, you're going to use that same sequence number plus all of the data, and you're going to send me back that as an acknowledgement, so that I know not only did you get the packet, but you got all the data in it. All right? And so we'll look at how that sequence number works. Now, I have to tell you what number I'm going to start counting at. Then when you send me the SYN-ACK back, you're going to tell me what number you're going to start counting at. And for Wireshark, the beautiful part of what Wireshark is, I can go ahead and have that be relative 0 for both sides. Because it's a lot easier for us as humans to start counting at 0 than to start counting at 4,387,399, which I hope was the same sequence number I used last time. And, it's a 32-bit number. I mean, I can't, my brain doesn't go that big, So it's a lot easier to look at it starting at 0. But I'll show you how to go ahead and toggle it each way, depending on what you want to do, all right? But so each side has to say what we're going to start counting at, and then each side is going to go ahead and say what their receive window size is. So how much space do they have to receive data? And we'll use that for flow control. And then to go ahead and discuss what options we want to have, because we've got to go ahead and set the parameters and the expectations for the conversation. So that is the whole goals of the handshake. Now, so let's see how that looks in our trace. Here we go. So I'm at sequence number 0. So when the client is the source, so looking at it from this single conversation, looking at it from when the client is the source, this number right now, you see how down here in the hex, you can actually see what the number is, but up here in the detail it says relative 0. Because remember, I can't do those big giant numbers, right? But if I want to go ahead and change that and actually see the sequence number, because let's say that I've captured data in multiple points along my network. And let's say that we're doing network address translation. And so I can't just filter for that same socket, you know, the IP address plus the port numbers, because, hi, the IP address changed. And I'm trying to find that sequence number again. Well, then I could maybe use the ephemeral port number plus the actual sequence number. Unless, of course, we're also doing PAT, and then the port number changes too, and that just makes it more challenging. But, you know, I can go ahead and I can see the sequence number and filter for it. So if I toggle it, so I did a right click and I went into protocol preferences. One thing you should know, when you do protocol preferences, it's specific to whatever protocol you're in. So I went ahead and I did a right click in the IP protocol preferences, and I get a completely different list. All right, so you always want to be careful where you are when you right click. So I'm in the TCP section, I come to protocol preferences, and I can toggle relative sequence numbers. So if you'd like to go and actually see the 32-bit number, then awesome, good for you. I don't want to see it, okay? So, but it's just a toggle. And those type of changes are saved down in your profile. So if you look way, 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 way down into the lower right-hand corner, you can see that I've got a profile just for this, for Sharkfest for TCP conversations. And so, oops, there we go. There we go. And so all of those type of parameter changes are saved, okay? Same thing is for my columns and things like that. And I actually, last night, I uploaded the trace files, but I forgot to upload the profile. So I will do that today. So the same URL will also have the profile for you too, okay? Now, yeah, alrighty. So I've got my sequence number. So I told the server that I was going to start counting at 39 Alpha Charlie 249 Foxtrot, all right? And then you see how it jumps from sequence number to header length? But see how down here in the hex, maybe I should bring this up a little bit, make it easier for y'all to see. There we go. So you see how when I jump from sequence number and then to length, and see how we just skipped a whole bunch of numbers right there? That's going to be for the acknowledgement number coming back from the other side. All right? So when I look at my SYNAC from the other side, those numbers will be filled in. So let's look at the server side SYNAC. So it's coming from port 21, going towards 56402, so my ephemeral port, right? He's also going to start counting at relative 0 for Wireshark. So when Wireshark looks at the conversation, it doesn't go ahead and look at both sides and say both sides, you know, are 0. It looks at each side independently. So when the server is the source, let's look at this beginning number. That's going to be starting 0 for the server side. We'll look at the client side. That's going to be 0 for the client side. All right? So the server's going to start counting at Fox Echo, 7 Foxtrot, 1 Echo, Echo Fox. Right? And then the acknowledgement number that he sends to me, so mine was, when I sent my SYN, my sequence number was 9 Foxtrot. Now the SYNAC that comes back, in the acknowledgement number, it's 1 more. They call it the phantom byte. So earlier I said that, remember TCP is a stream, all bytes are counted. Well, in the handshake, there aren't any data bytes to count. But we have to acknowledge one another that we went ahead and sent a synchronization request. Has to be some way to go ahead and do that. So we just go ahead and increment it by 1. So phantom byte. So since I sent 9F, he comes back and echoes alpha 0, 1 more. So I've got an acknowledgement number of 1. Now, whoops, try that over there. Now, when I go ahead and acknowledge him, remember he sent EF. So when I come back and I send my acknowledgement number back to him, there we go, Fox 0. So 1 more. All right. So now both of us have said what our starting sequence numbers is going to be. Both of us have acknowledged that beginning sequence number for the phantom byte. After that, it is literally a byte count. So as we go through the stream, just like in other protocols where you might see like a file offset and I want to read, 64K, just in same concept. At offset, 0, read another 64K, at offset 64K, and then another 64K. It's the same idea. It's just a byte count. Now, when we do the fin and we tear the conversation down, then you'll have that phantom byte again for the fin. But throughout the rest of the conversation, it is just a byte count. Now, when I look at the conversation as it goes through, let's go ahead and go back here. There we go. There we go. Okay. Now, as we go ahead and we transfer data back and forth, let's say that we're downloading this, monstrously huge file, and you want to go ahead and figure out how deep into the download you are at any given point. Well, since we went ahead and we used relative sequence numbers, that is a byte count. So if I have a 2 gig file and my sequence number is at, 1 million, then I can tell how many bytes have I gone, how deep have I gone in. And a lot of times when you're troubleshooting an issue, you want to kind of notice when something bad happens, does it happen in a consistent place? So for example, we're downloading, let's say that I've logged in and I'm downloading the image for my VDI, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and use a thin client. And we're having a little challenge with the thin client. Does it always happen at the same point? Is there a problem in the file itself? All right. So if you see, like all of a sudden, we get a TCP reset, and a reset means something bad happens. Somebody did something they weren't supposed to do. And so if we see a TCP reset at approximately that same byte count, then we know that there's some type of issue maybe with the file itself. Gives us a little more clues to see what's going on. All right? And that's one of the things you're looking for when you're looking at troubleshooting. Do you see things happening in patterns? Okay. Now, when you look at the sequence numbers, okay, let's say that we're sending a data string back and forth, and my beginning SYN is byte 0, all right? And let's say I go ahead and I send a nice full maximum segment size with every packet, nice full data packets. And we'll talk about segment size in just 1 second. For right now, let's say it's 1460. So I can fit 1,460 bytes into a packet. And I'm going ahead and sending this string back and forth to the server, or excuse me, up to the server. Wait a second for the truck to go by. Now, so my sequence numbers for the first chunk would be, so remember my SYN is my phantom byte, that's my 0 count, would be 1 through 1460, and then 1461 to 2920, 2921 to 4380, 4381 to 5840, to 5841 to 7300. You'd be amazed how quickly you start to be able to count in increments of 1460. It's really sad, but you will be. The more traces that you look at, all right? But a lot of times what I do is I look at that beginning sequence number, and I go ahead and add in the data, and that's what's going to be the next sequence number. That's going to be the expected acknowledgement that's going to come back, all right? And so if I take, 1461 plus 1460, next thing you know, I got 2921. Or 2921 plus 1460, next thing you know, I got 4381. So when the acknowledgement number comes back, bless you, the acknowledgement number comes back, we're not just acknowledging that first sequence number, but we're acknowledging all the data that's in it. Okay. Now, the sweet part is, yes, sir. Yeah, it's in bytes. Mm-hmm. And so the nice part is Wireshark will go ahead and put that value in there for you. So for example, you've got to be on a packet that has some data in it, all right? Not on just an empty acknowledgement packet. So look in your length column for something that's got more than 60 or 66 bytes into it. All right. So I've got one here, it's 126 bytes. I've got an FTP response, so in TCP language, that's just data. TCP could not care less what the application protocol is. And so I've got some application layer data. In fact, Wireshark is kind enough to go ahead and calculate it for me. So I've got a length of 60 bytes. Now, that 60 bytes isn't actually a field in the center section in your packet details. It's something that's not, it's not exposed, it's not, a line item because it's not actually something that's in the hex, but it's something that Wireshark is calculating for you. And therefore, you can use it as a custom field in either your columns, you can use it in, let's say, in any of our I/O graphs, those type of things. It's used in a lot of the TCP stream graphs. So that number is part of something that Wireshark's calculating for you. It's keeping a stateful piece of information. Now, so if I look at that 60 bytes, right, and I come down here a little bit, and you notice that Wireshark, right underneath that sequence number, says next sequence number. You notice that nothing's highlighted down here, but any of the other times when I've been highlighting fields up here in the packet bytes, in the packet details, it highlights it down in the packet bytes, right? But you see how that one's in bracket? If it's in bracket, then that means that that's a Wireshark field. That's not actually really a field in the packet itself, hence the reason there's nothing highlighted. Okay, so when you see a bracket field, that's a Wireshark field. And so what Wireshark is doing is it's taking, hey, let me go ahead and take that beginning sequence number, the sequence number in this packet. Let me take the length of the data that I see. Let me add those two together for the human, all right? I love that because my math skills are not as awesome as they could be. So now I know that the acknowledgement number that should come back is 61. And sure enough, in my next packet, I've got an acknowledgement from the client, and the ACK is 61. So my client is saying, hey, not only did I get the packet, but I got all the data, all right? And those are the things that you're going to look for. So that next sequence number field is a great field to go ahead and add into your columns. So I'm going to do a right-click on that one and say Apply as Column. There we go. So now I have what the next sequence number is. And I like to go ahead and add TCP length, but since it's not a field that shows up in the detail, I can't just go ahead and right-click on it. I love right-click and Apply as Column. I think that came out in like 1.6, and I was like, oh, yay. Okay. So I love being able to just right-click on it, but that doesn't mean that you can't just add anything else. Any of those right-click columns, those are just custom columns. Those are just custom fields. So if I want to go ahead and add in my length, all I got to do is come up to my preferences. So I'll do an edit preferences. There we go. And then come on down to columns, there along the left. And you see how a lot of these other ones that I've already got in there, they just say custom? Those are all the ones that I right-clicked and added. So I'm going to go ahead and do an add. And in field type, drop that down. There we go. They're alphabetical, so just come on up to custom. There we go. Okay. And there we go. And then you just down in the field name, you put in tcp.len. Because it was funny, the first time I did it, I'm like, well, I have no idea what the field name is. But I know it's in TCP, so I typed in TCP, put a dot, and I'm like, well, it has something to do with length. Type an L, think positive thoughts. And sure enough, it's TCP length, okay? So, don't be afraid, man. So we'll call that length, TCP length. There we go. Yeah. So I'm going to put that right next to my sequence number, and then my next sequence number. There we go. And tell it OK. There we are. So my sequence number plus my length is my next expected sequence number. And then now that I've got them all as columns, I can see how long it takes for that next sequence number to show up as an acknowledgement number. Now, the conversation that we're looking at right now is very much a ping-pong conversation. Server says something, application layer-wise to the client responded. Server said something, client responded. So application layer-wise, we're having a ping-pong conversation here. So each one of these acknowledgements are right after the sequence number. If I'm doing a large download, then what I should see is sequence number, sequence number, sequence number, sequence number, sequence number, sequence number, and then see a nice ACK. And the question is, how long does that ACK take to go ahead and acknowledge? Because a lot of times what you'll see is you'll see a big chunk of sequence numbers, and then more sequence numbers, and the ACK that you see comes back is for some of these sequence numbers way up higher in the conversation. So how long does that take? And it makes it a little easier to see if you go ahead and have it as a column. Right? Yeah. So we've got our sequence numbers and we've got our acknowledgement numbers. Let's go back into our handshake and look at some of our options. Yeah. So coming on down to the bottom, oh, wait, one more, is we've got our window size value. So remember, one of the other goals of the conversation, of the handshake, is to let the other side know what our receive window is. How much space do we have available for data? Now, if the world were perfect, we would also have a field that says this is what my sender window is. But it's not a perfect world, and we don't do that. So, that's an open discussion, what the sender's window is, all right? How much space can they go ahead and, because remember, TCP is connection oriented. So when I send you a packet, I have to keep a copy of that in my TCP sender window until you acknowledge it. So then I can flush it out of the buffer. Because if you don't acknowledge it, I have to retransmit it. So I've got to keep a copy. I can't go back up to the application layer and ask them for it again, because they're like, I don't even know what you're talking about. All right, that was your job. So, so I have to keep a copy. So I never know what the sender's window is, but I always know what the receiver's window is. So every single packet that you send back and forth in TCP, you say, and now my receive window is blah, blah, blah. All right? So at the beginning of the conversation, my client went ahead and told the server, hey, I got 65,535. So 64K window size, nice, healthy window. All right? When the server comes back, let's see what the server said. Same thing, 65,535. Anybody have something different than 65,535? Please. 8192, so a nice little 8K window. Now, so you've got an 8K window, plenty big enough, all right? You can fit a whole bunch of packets in there, right? But doesn't seem very big though, does it, right? Now, tell me about your laptop. You're running Windows 7, you're running Linux, you're running Windows 7, all right? Probably got, 4 gigs of RAM, Mac Daddy little laptop, you're cooking with gas, thinking you should be going, I'm a little concerned about the fact I got 8K window here. All right, don't worry, there's gonna be more when we talk about Windows scaling, and I bet you anything, your window's not really 8K. It's really a lot bigger. We just don't know it yet, all right? So, perfect example for Windows scaling, thank you, okay? So, don't worry yet, all right? Now, and that's what this number is in the bracket. So right after the actual window size that's in the actual hex, you've got a bracketed field. In other words, Wireshark fields, got those square brackets, that says what the calculated window size is. Now, Wireshark doesn't do any of the calculation until after the handshake has completed, and then it will actually do calculations, all right? But what we're about to talk about in that part is one of the options is window scaling. So when we go down to the options section, we see the window scaling field. We'll talk about that in just a second. All right. So now scrolling on down, okay, we've got our options section. Now, for everybody's machine, at the bare minimum, we have to discuss segment size. Now, so your first field in your options should be for your segment size. Now, let's talk about segment size for a second. Oh, yeah, one thing I should tell you, all right, before we go into all the options. In TCP, silence means no. So in application layer protocols, sometimes silence means yes, all right? But in TCP, silence means no. So if I go ahead and I tell you, I want to support option XYZ, and you go ahead and say my MSS is 1460, and that is all you say, then I can't do any of my fun, cool options, because you didn't say anything about that, all right? So in the option negotiation, what we both do is we say, these are the things that I support, these are the things that I want to do, and if the client doesn't ask for a particular option, the server, even if they're capable, won't bring it up, because that would be rude. All right? TCP is an incredibly polite protocol. All right? I live in Georgia, where, you know, everybody's ma'am and sir, and thank you so much, and I sure appreciate you coming. So I love TCP because it's a very polite protocol. So if the client goes ahead and says, here's my MSS, and that's all I know, so that is all I say, the server could be going, oh my gosh, you know, I can do SAC, and I can do window scaling, and I can do time stamping, and I can't bring any of that up because you didn't bring it up. So my MSS is this as well. Yeah. So when you're looking at server capabilities, just because the server didn't say anything doesn't necessarily mean the server can't do it. It means that the client didn't ask. So if you're trying to figure out server capabilities, look at all of the handshakes for that server. Look at handshakes from different clients, because it's very possible that that server is capable, but they can't bring it up if the client doesn't bring it up. All right, so very polite protocol. Okay, so we're gonna, the 4 options that we're gonna look at are maximum segment size, window scaling, selective acknowledgements, and time stamping. Okay, so there's no negative ACK. There's no such thing as a negative ACK in TCP either. There's only acknowledgements. And you don't ACK an ACK either. So if I send you an acknowledgement and you don't get it, we have a whole world of hurt. So okay, we kind of hope that the ACKs get there, but they don't always, all right? And then we've got to figure out what to do, but there's no such thing as a negative acknowledgement. Okay. Now, so the first one of the options is the maximum segment size. And what the maximum segment size is how much data can I stick into a packet? All right? How much stuff can I put after that TCP header? Now, a lot of people think that, you know, the window size is how many packets you can receive. No, the window size is how many bytes you can receive. And the maximum segment size is how many bytes can you send at a time. All right? So if I have a full-size, regular, plain old Ethernet packet, so I've got, 1,518 bytes in my Ethernet packet. I don't have any, Ethernet, I don't have any 802.1q headers or anything. There's no VLAN tags, anything like that, just a plain generic packet. Then I can fit 1,460 bytes. So you take the 1518, you pull out the Ethernet header. So you have your destination address, your source address, your ether type, and then at the very, very end, your CRC. So now, does everybody know that when you're sniffing packets in Wireshark, right, the driver goes ahead and chops off the CRC. So when you look at that length column and you see 1514, it's really 1518. Everybody knows that, right? Okay, well, you do now. All right. So, okay. So if it says 60, it was really 64. So no matter how big that packet was, when the driver of the cards, bringing that packet in, and they go ahead and they hit that end of frame delimiter, and they back up 4 bytes, and they go, okay, let's calculate that CRC. Hey, is this CRC good? Awesome, great. Let me pipe that to Wireshark. Oh, this CRC is wrong. Boom. Oh, well, Wireshark will never know. They don't need to know. I'm not going to tell them. So if you've got a bad packet, you'll never know in Wireshark, all right, without specialized drivers, all right? That's not its purpose. So the CRC, the value of the CRC is irrelevant. What matters is it's right or wrong. So we don't actually maintain that data. So when you look at it and it says 1514, it's really 1518. All right, just for the math purposes, okay? Then, so you take out the Ethernet header, and you're left with a 1500 maximum transmission unit. That's where that 1500 number comes from. So for those of us, you go ahead and you configure a router, and you're like, hey, what's the MTU? 1500. You're ever wondering, like, hey, where'd that number come from? Right there, okay? Now, if I take out a default IP header and a default TCP header, there's another. Now I got a siren. Okay, so, oh, we're busted. Okay, so I take out my IP header and my TCP header, and I'm left with the 1460. So that's actually my optimum maximum segment size. Now, let's say that when you all look at your maximum segment sizes, right? So go ahead and look in your trace file, okay? Does anybody have, so in their options, it'll be the first one listed. Does anybody have something besides 1460? I think in the Owen trace file, he had something less than 1460. No, 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 really? None of you? Thank you, 1430. All right, so now is that from your client or is that the server, the SYNAC packet? Well now, okay, so the easiest way to tell is to go ahead and look in the info column. So whatever packet you've got highlighted, it's kind of gray now in the info column, up in the top section. Yep, I bet you that it's the server side. Yep, so it's real common to go ahead and have the server come back and he takes out an extra 30 bytes, and it could be, you know, there's a multitude of things that it could be for. And the reason I ask everybody if they had a different maximum segment size is it's real common if, like, let's say you've got a VPN client installed. You don't necessarily have to be on the VPN right now, you just have to have a VPN client installed. And that VPN client wants to go ahead and take space away from that maximum segment size because it's going to go ahead and put, you know, we're going to do, you know, whatever protocol we use for our VPN, and we need to have space available for that. Same thing on the server side. He could have a myriad of things that we need to go ahead and take those 30 bytes for and set it aside. You know, we could be doing, you know, Q and Q headers. We could be, I mean, there's just, you know. So there's some protocol that is installed or running on that machine that says, hey, I need some of this space because I'm going to have some headers as well and that are not in that list. And I want to make sure that the other side knows that. Now, so let's say that, so for your conversation, you know, your client probably said 1460 and then the server said 1430, right? I don't know his name, so I can't call him out. Okay, all right. So what's going to happen in that conversation is the RFC says that we're supposed to go ahead and be able to have two different numbers there, and you know, one side will use one number and one side will use the other number. But what I have seen over the years is lowest number wins. So remember, it's a very polite protocol. So if you tell me that you can do 1260, I'll go, okay, and I'll do 1260, all right? So with that, and that is exactly what I've seen in you know, you look at, you know, 5 million trace files, you start to notice stuff like that. So, so lowest number wins is the most common implementation. So what that says to me is if I've got a client who goes ahead and tells the server that my MSS is lower, and we start to complain about throughput, and I've got a 4 gig file we need to transfer, suddenly that becomes a lot more important, all right? So whoever said they had the lower number, they're the ones who are throttling down that conversation a little bit, making it not as optimal as it could be. All right, so in my conversation, both sides said 1460, so we're good to go, all right? Then I have what they call, sometimes, you know, I've got padding for these different options, right? And you'll see this no op, so no operation. And all it is we're looking for 4-byte chunks in the options. So it's just a little padding, all right? Then I've got window scaling. Now, let's talk about window scaling. Okay, here, let me flip back over and bring up the slide for window scaling. There you go. Now, the whole purpose of window scaling, so remember how you had an 8192 window size? You're like, oh, right? Now, did you scroll down a bit? Are you doing window scaling? Did it ask for, say, something about window scale in the header? So way down in the options from your client side? Awesome. Okay, so multiply by 4? Perfect. Now, hey, 8K times 4 is suddenly a lot better, right? So what the whole purpose of the window scaling is when I saw my window size, and I had a 64K window, here, let me pop back, right? And I had a 64K window size. Let me get back up there. There you are. You notice in the hex, that's FF. Can I get any bigger? No. And then the next field is checksum. So it's not like I can keep going. All right, I've run out of space. So in order to be able to have larger windows, and remember, that's my receive buffer. So if you've gone ahead and you've sent me 64K worth of data, then, and I haven't sent you an acknowledgement yet, you've got to stop and wait patiently for me, no matter how long it takes. Yay, okay? Now let's pretend there's a satellite in between us, and there's a little physical latency. You've went ahead, you've sent your data, I said I had 64K, and you sent me a whole bunch of data, and it goes through the air and hits the satellite, comes on down. I receive the first couple packets, right? And I start to send an acknowledgement, and that acknowledgement is making its way back through the air, back to you. You've already sent your 64K. And now you're waiting for that ACK to physically make it back to you so you can go, oh, look, she ACKed 2 packets, yay, now I can send another one. So, okay, so you can imagine that this is not, exactly optimal, right? So one way to get it past that was to go ahead and add window scaling to the options. So now if we go ahead and we say that both sides have to support it, so let me flip back over to my slide, right? Both sides have to support it, but they don't have to agree on the number. So if I tell the client, I'm the client, if I tell the server that I want to go ahead and do window scaling, and let's say that I have, a scaling factor of 2, and so 2 to the second is 4. So I'm going to multiply my window size by 4. It's the server's job. Now, if he supports window scaling as well, he'll come back and say, yeah, sure, I want to do window scaling. However, I'm going to use a factor of 3. So 2 to the third is, thank you, 8. And I told you, math is not my gift. So, so he's going to go ahead and multiply his window size by 8. It's my job to remember that. So every time I see his window size, let's say his window size is 64K, it's my job to remember to multiply it by 8. When I go ahead and send data to him and I have a window size of 64K, it's his job to remember to multiply mine by 4. All right? So now let's say that he doesn't want to do window scaling, but he does support it and he's happy if I want to do it. So like he knows he's going to remember to go ahead and multiply, but right now, if he's like, yeah, I got 64K and that's all I got. Number one, I'm concerned about him because he should have a lot more, okay? And that's another thing, the window scale factor, that's another thing. If I'm able to capture a lot of data close to that server and looking for patterns, I want to see, all right, well, hey, when I have 300 concurrent connections, my server goes ahead and does window scaling by a factor of, I want to go ahead and multiply it by 1024, bring it on, right? But, when all of a sudden I have 500 or 1,000 concurrent connections, we go ahead and we do it by a scale factor of 0. 2 to the 0 is 1, multiplied by 1, all right? I just learned a lot about that server, looking at that scaling factor, okay? So it is a dynamic number based on the current condition of that box, all right? It is not a static field. So the capability is static, but the number's not. So it tells you a lot about that machine. It tells you a lot about the clients too, but more importantly, I care about the servers, right? So when I'm looking at that, the goal is, do you support it? So if he goes ahead and he's like, yeah, I'm cool if you do it, but I don't want to do it, all right? Because I don't have enough buffer space anyway, right? I'm a little busy here. I've got 8,000 current connections. And so he'll go ahead and tell me, yes, I can do window scale factor. So flip back in here, right? Let's see what my server says. So my server says, yeah, I can do window scale factor, all right? But, so right here he would put that he had a shift count of 0. And so Wireshark would go ahead and say multiply by 1. then I know he's capable, but he's not going to actually do it. And that's fine. That's fine. Not fine for the server, but it's fine for the conversation. The conversation will still continue. All right? Now, let's say that I, as the client, go ahead and say, I want to do window scaling. And the server says, my MSS is 1460. Do I get to do window scaling? No. Oh, well. Okay. So then the question is, does that server normally do window scaling? I want to look at lots and lots of conversations coming from that server. I want to filter for all the syntax. Do you normally have that in there? All right? And that's one of the nice things about this button. There we go. The handy dandy make all my columns exactly the right width button. It's my personal favorite button. All right? Because one of the things that I'm looking for is, you know, if I do a, let me zoom back out. Wait a second. Stand by. Can't do this and zoom out at the same time. So if I go ahead and scroll over, and I do a filter for TCP SYN-ACK, right, and the flags, both a SYN and an ACK, then I can quick and dirty go ahead and figure out what options that server supports. All right? If I want to pipe it out to go ahead and do any analysis on it, then I would go ahead and add those as columns, and then pipe it out. All right? Or I do it in T-Shark and just pipe it out that way. It'd be a lot easier. Depending on how much data I've got. Okay? But it's the easiest way. So that, you know, I mean, I like to go down here in the detail and show you where these things are so you can see them in the hex, you know, because I like to look at hex because I'm strange that way. But it's right here in the info. Okay, don't be afraid to look up there. All right. So, so my server's like, oh yeah, I can do window scaling. I'm going to multiply it by a factor of, by a shift count of 10. So 2 to the 10 is 1024, and yay, love those bracket columns, excuse me, those bracket fields that say, oh, by the by, multiply that by 1024, okay? Do I go to 1130 or 1115? I should know this, I'm so sorry. 11, I go to 1130, okay, thanks. All right. Huh? Really? Do I really? No, I only go to 11:30, right? Okay. All right. I don't wear a watch, so I never have any concept of time. All right. So we're going to shift it, you know, by 10. Okay. Now, coming back. All right. The next thing that the client goes and talks about is selective acknowledgements. Now, when we were looking at the sequence number, remember that we said that however much data you sent in each packet, you know, the TCP length field, right, back up here, you know, my TCP length field, all right, how much data is in there. When you're looking at that and the acknowledgement number that comes back is your sequence number plus your length of your data is the acknowledgement number coming back. But we don't have to send an ACK for every single packet. I mean, we do have to send an ACK for every single packet, but it's not a one-to-one relationship. So in the beginning, you'll have TCP slow start. You'll see, you know, I send some data, you send an ACK. Then we start to know and trust one another. And as more data is sent, fewer acknowledgements are sent, and you have what they call a cumulative acknowledgement. So my client can go ahead, or the receiver of the data, because remember, you know, clients can upload. The receiver of the data can go ahead and say, I'm acknowledging multiple packets. So not just one, but multiple. And so as we're looking at those acknowledgement numbers, you can imagine, now let's go back to our satellite discussion, right? And if I have, you know, I've got this, you know, my server said he's got a 10, you know, window scaling by a factor of 1024. You know, you do 64K times 1024, that's a big old monster window, right? And if I want to go ahead and now, you know, this big file upload to the server, what are the odds up to that satellite and back that every single packet's going to get there? No, yeah, not very good. Okay, some loss is normal. All right. So you know, when we're in the data center, we like to think that every single packet's going to get there. But man, once you hit that WAN link, right? You know, we're just hopeful. All right. So so if I do acknowledgements, normal acknowledgements, I can only acknowledge cumulative data. I can't acknowledge any missing pieces. So going back to our little diagram here, let's see. There we go. So let's say that we're starting to transfer this stream of data. And this first packet right here, That one gets received. Everything is good. Next packet, that one is received. Everything is good. This third one gets eaten by the network. These things happen, all right? But the fourth one goes through, okay? Wouldn't it be nice if the other side could go ahead and let me know that? That's what selective acknowledgements are for. So in the acknowledgement field, in your detail section, the acknowledgement field is for all cumulative data, no missing pieces. The selective acknowledgements can be down in the options section, and you can have from the left edge of what data was received to the right edge. Now, I kind of ran out of space in PowerPoint, right, to the, I should draw it smaller, but then you can't see it. So let's pretend I've got another line right here, and we're down at like 7,300 and more packets, right? So this one got eaten by the network. Sequence number 2921 got eaten by the network. Now, so what I would say in my acknowledgement number is I've received 2921 bytes because I got 1460 plus 1460 plus 1 phantom. So my acknowledgement number is 2921. In other words, that's the next expected to receive sequence number. It's the same thing, all right? So, oh, and then by the way, down in the options, I can go ahead and tell you that I got, let's say I've got the next one, which would be 7,300. I could tell you I got from the left edge of 4381 through the right edge of 7,300. I got this packet and then the packet I didn't get a chance to draw last night. So let's just be honest. So now I can go ahead and my selective acknowledgement. Now the other side knows, all right, that data has been received. It has been acknowledged. Now, this is not a reason to kick off a retransmission timer. It is not a purpose to say, oh, by the way, could you send me another packet? All right, because in TCP, we don't believe you the first time you say something. So if I go ahead and I send you an acknowledgement, and down in the SAC section, I say, oh, and by the way, I got from the left edge of 4381 through the right edge of 7,300. In other words, I got 2 more packets. You're going to go, okay, good to know. I'm going to think only hopeful thoughts and figure that that one packet is on its way to you somehow, some way. All right? It's in the network somewhere. It'll get there. Those whole different paths and things, right? Then you go ahead and you tell me again, excuse me, I've received all data through 2921, and I have selectively received from the left edge of 4381 to the right edge of 7,300, and you go, oh, well, that's good. Good to know. Mental note, I just received that acknowledgement twice. Good to know, okay? And then once again, you're like, dude, seriously, all right? Hello? I got everything through 2921, and then I also got, left edge and right edge of 4381 through 7,300. And you go, oh, you missed one. Oh, okay, no problem. Let me retransmit that. And the RFC says that once you've received those 3 acknowledgements, all right, so 1 ACK, 2 dupes, you'll go ahead and immediately retransmit. That's what the spec says. Now, when you look at a trace file, that doesn't necessarily happen, but that's what you're supposed to do. And that's the whole reason we do protocol analysis, is what are they supposed to do, right? And then do they do it, okay? So the question then would be, all right, great, you've told me that, and I've been able, you've selectively acknowledged that data, so I don't have to keep it in my buffer anymore. I know you got it. Now, I know there's this missing piece that I have to keep in my buffer, because you haven't ACKed it. So I've got to keep that 1 packet in my buffer. But the selectively acknowledged data, I can go ahead and flush that. Because, hey, you already got it. You're good to go, right? And what that means is now I've got more space to go ahead and send you more data. Because remember, I'm thinking only positive thoughts because I'm sunshine and love. I know you're going to get that packet. So I'm just going to keep sending you more data, right? And okay, so the fact that you've selectively acknowledged me is great because now I can flush that other data out of my buffer, right? And I can just keep sending you more. But it's not until I've received 3 acknowledgements for the same sequence number that I go ahead and go, oh, I need to go ahead and actually retransmit. Now, when you see the duplicate acknowledgements, you have to bear in mind, where are you physically capturing? So in what relationship do you see that? So let's say that I am capturing at the client. Client has received the data, client notices there's a segment lost, TCP analysis flag for previous segment lost, and the client goes ahead and starts to duplicate acknowledged. Hey, I'm missing a piece here, okay? And we see that at the client perspective. Well, so we see the client go ahead and say, duback, 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 duback. You know, I'm up to like 57 dubacks, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, what is up with that? Well, bear in mind, how much time has that taken? And has it had time to physically get to the server yet? And physically for the server to send that retransmission. So what we need to do is pull out network round trip time. So one of the other reasons we want to look at the handshake is let's see how long that would have taken. Now, in the trace file that I've got, all right, got a nice little column here for TCP delta time. And all that is in my preferences. Oops, try that again. In my preferences, there we go. Okay. I've got calculate conversation timestamps turned on. Now, bear in mind, every single column that I go ahead and add, and every single thing that I tell Wireshark to go ahead and calculate, puts a draw against my Wireshark. You know, there's a CPU cost to be paid for all these calculations. So don't be afraid to throw hardware at it, is all I'm saying, all right? Okay, so everything that you turn on, it's going to take a little longer for your Wireshark to go ahead and display. You know, solid state drives will change your life, and more memory is a beautiful thing. So I'm calculating my conversation timestamps, and I've added TCP delta time in as a column. So for my conversation, there we go. How long did it take, here let me zoom in, there we go. How long did it take from the time the client sent the SYN to the server sent the SYN-ACK? I'm capturing at the client, this is a trace file we did last year. Capturing at the client, how long did it take? About 146 milliseconds, all right? So if I see those duplicate acknowledgements, then what I need to do is go ahead and reference, you know, set as a time reference that first packet where we see previous segment lost, okay? And now start watching those duplicate acknowledgements. But I have to give the server at least 146 milliseconds to receive those duplicate acks and send that retransmission. Now, RFC says you're supposed to get 3, and you're supposed to do it right away. But we've got 146 milliseconds in between the client and the server. That's going to be a lot of duplicate acks. So when all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, I have 400 duplicate, well, 400 would be kind of excessive, but I have 40 duplicate acks. Don't panic until you do a time measurement. Now, let's say that, okay, I've got 146 milliseconds, and it takes the server 200 milliseconds to send that fast retransmission. Am I concerned about the server? So it takes so my handshake says 146. That's how much time it takes, you know, for me to get that SYN over to the server and the SYN-ACK back. That's like my best time. That's my baseline. All right? So if it takes the server 200 milliseconds to go ahead and send that retransmission, am I worried? Yeah, I am. All right? Because, you know, that's an extra 60 milliseconds. So if it takes an extra 60 milliseconds to recover from any packet loss, and I'm on a WAN link, and, you know, oh, let's put a WAN link across continent. Yeah. So I got a WAN link across continent. You know, what do y'all think would be a good amount of packet loss, or an acceptable amount of packet loss? I have a number in my head. You know, this is like, you know, what's your favorite color question? All answers are correct. So we've got a WAN link, we've got a cross continent. What do you think would be an acceptable packet loss? 1 in 10,000. Help me with a percentage. What would that be? 0.01. Ooh, wow, you're thinking only positive thoughts. So 0.01%, okay. I was thinking more like 3, but yeah, okay. And so, you know, I mean, if I've got a WAN link, I usually look at maybe 1%. If I've got, you know, local area network, you know, inside the data center or where I own the equipment, then yes, that's exactly what I want to see. I want to see 0.01%. You know, I want to see, you know, great low packet loss. But if I'm going across stuff that, even though I have an SLA, at what point do you start calling in about your SLA? That's really what you're looking for, okay? So if I've got packet loss, then how long does it take to recover? So if I've got, even in 1 in 10,000, and I go ahead and I've got, 8 million packets in order to transfer that file, that's still an extra 60 milliseconds every time that I have got to go ahead and do recovery. Not exactly as fast as it needs to be. So if I've got a box who is not retransmitting as fast as it's supposed to be, is that an application problem or an operating system problem? Well, it should only be TCP, though. It should only be an operating system issue. Because remember, that's the whole purpose of the TCP, is to hide all that from the application. So, when you have application latency, that's going to be a totally different thing. Now, how the application deals with, the timeouts because of those retransmissions could come into play. But the actual retransmissions themselves should be based on just the OS stack. All right? So I've got to look at the operating system if it's not retransmitting in the time we expect. And that's the whole purpose of looking. All right? Is it happening within what I expect? I'll go ahead and look at packets where we retransmit and took an extra 200 milliseconds to retransmit. And every time you've got a retransmission, or I've got one trace file that we're going to do tomorrow, and it takes the server a second to go ahead and retransmit. That takes a while. Paul? Yes. So it's like, if it's bad the first time, it's only going to get worse. Exactly. Because yes, just like Paul said, if I go ahead and I have a retransmission timeout, and I go ahead and I retransmit, then I'm just going to turn right around and double my retransmission timer. It's a dynamic algorithm, so we, hopefully, as the network gets better, right? We'll go ahead and it'll start to average back down, but then we have another retransmission, double it, and then it starts to average back down. We have another retransmission, double it. Starts to average back down. I can't double it. My arms aren't big enough, right? So yes, it only gets worse. It never gets better. Yeah, okay. But now we don't have to, though, in the duplicate acknowledgement situation, though, we don't have to worry about waiting for the timeout. But we do have to watch, do you go ahead and do a retransmission, a fast retransmission, just like you're supposed to? Now, what does Wireshark consider a fast retransmission? So if you look in the, if it's faster, yeah. If you look at the fast retransmissions, and I don't know if I have one in this trace. Let me do a filter right quick. TCP.analysis, dot flags. Nope, I don't have one in this trace file. But so how Wireshark calculates a fast retransmission is if it goes ahead and we see, at least 3 acknowledgements for the same sequence number, and then a retransmission of that sequence number within 20 milliseconds of the last duplicate acknowledge. It'll be flagged as a fast retransmission. So that may be the 3rd one, it may be the 30th one, it may be the 300th one. It's still called a fast retransmission. So, yeah, okay. It might not actually be fast, right? So you want to look at, how long does it really take? And that's the beauty of going ahead, we'll do a right click on it, set it as a time reference, right? Look for the retransmission. So if I set this as a time reference, all it does is it goes ahead, takes the time column, zeroes out that time, starts adding up the delta time relative to the reference point. So now I can scroll down, how long did it take? Okay, so let me put it back. There we go. And it's just a toggle. And I can do multiple set reference points within the same trace file. You're not stuck with just one. You can do multiples. Now, here we go, okay. 11:30, right? Okay, so, okay, I have one more field, one more thing to talk about. I'm so close. All right, so I always have a tendency to go over, so I have to watch myself like a hawk. Okay, now, so there's my selective acknowledgements. All right, and the whole purpose is so that I can have that great big giant window, but I can still go ahead and acknowledge non-cumulative data so that the other side can go ahead and flush it out of their buffer and they've got more room. Now, the last option is times, oh, sorry, go ahead. It's totally TCP. It's totally blind. The application layer is like, oh, I don't know what's going on. Yeah. Exactly, exactly. And so, and now, and the kicker, of course, is if we're doing selective acknowledgements. Now, all right, so, you know, XP supported it. It didn't do it by default, but it supported it. So like, you know, if you were running like, you know, a little web server on an XP box for the fun of it, and somebody came in and asked for SAC, it would do it, right? But when it initiated, it wouldn't ask for it. So, I mean, we're going back a long way for SAC, okay? This is not new. But let's say that we go ahead and we're doing selective acknowledgements, but now we go through a couple little boxes in the middle. You know, load balancers and firewalls and optimizers and, you know, those things. And they go ahead and strip those out of the header. Yeah. Yeah. Just because you sniffed it in one place doesn't mean it made it all the way through. All right? So when the world is truly perfect, we capture in multiple places. All right? Watch that handshake go through the network. All right? Then the world is truly perfect. But yeah, because, you know, just because I said it in the beginning doesn't mean it made it all the way through. It's just like, you know, QoS in the IP header, you know, the differentiated services code point. Okay, you got to work on that one. So, you know, just because we go ahead and we set it as expedited forwarding doesn't mean that it made it expedited forwarding through the cloud, right? Same thing, okay? So if I go ahead and I strip out that we're doing SAC, then when it gets to the server, because sometimes you look at the server responses at the client and you're like, how come the server isn't doing SAC? I know he can do SAC. It's because somebody stripped it before the server got it. And the server's like, oh, well, the client didn't ask for it. I can't do it, okay? Or worst case scenario, so we pull out SAC. So then it's, you know, in selective acknowledgements, it's just, you know, it's just not as optimal, right? The kicker is when one of those little boxes in the middle plays with the window scaling. So if they just strip it, then when the server gets it, he's like, okay, you don't do window scaling, great, I won't do window scaling, fine, no problem, even though I could, and sends back, right? But if it changes the value, then oh yeah, it gets really ugly because, you know, I think you've got, you know, I'm supposed to multiply that by 1, but you think that I'm supposed to multiply it by 1024. All of a sudden that AK window is really different. You multiply it by 1, you multiply it by 1024. Big difference, yeah. And you can see how ugly that can get, yeah. So you got to capture in both places. Oh, I'm sorry? Okay. Okay, because I have like 4 minutes. Uh-huh. Yeah, wouldn't that be cool? No, it doesn't do that. No. Yeah, 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 right, yeah, yeah. Because, you know, back when we had collisions, you know, then yes, layer 2 took care of that, right? And it was so much faster. But no, yeah, yeah. So, okay, now, so the last one is the timestamping. Now, this one is not necessarily on by default, so it may be in your trace, it might not. All right? Oops. There we go, timestamping. So same thing, both sides have to support it, all right? And your goals are a little more granular round-trip time measurements, so maybe instead of calculating that round-trip time that, you know, you brought up, Paul, instead of calculating that, you know, per window or per window size, let's go ahead and calculate it per frame. Also, so do you have more granular information and to calculate the time for each way traffic. So instead of calculating from the time that I send a sequence number to the time you send me an acknowledgement number, let's go ahead and put timestamps in every packet, and we'll go ahead and timestamp it as it leaves. You see the timestamp as you receive it. Now you know one-way distance in time. So we have a lot more granular data to work with, which is great. The other reason that it's used is it can be a tiebreaker if we go ahead and we have a very long-lived conversation where we're doing, 10 gig environment, we're pushing a lot of data through. You'd be amazed how quickly that 32-bit number goes ahead and wraps. And so the timestamp can also be used as a tiebreaker to figure out, is this a retransmission or is this just the same sequence number over? Okay. Now, excuse me. So let's see that one in our trace. Okay. Now, the Owen trace file, that was taken from a Windows 7 machine. The Betty trace file was taken from a Mac. Okay. So the Windows 7 machine does not go ahead and ask for timestamps by default. So when you look in yours, you won't see timestamps. All right. But a Unix-based variant will go ahead and ask for timestamping. So Linux box, a Unix box, Mac, okay, we'll go ahead and ask for timestamps. Now, so when I go ahead and come on down, there you are, timestamps. Okay. So I go ahead and I tell the server, what timestamp I'm going to go ahead and start stamping these packets. And when the server comes back, he goes ahead, he echoes my time, so now I know he supports it, and he goes ahead and tells me what timestamp he's going to use to start with. And now as we send packets back and forth, and we look at the sequence number and the acknowledgement coming back, now I have one-way timestamps. All right? I get a lot more granular data. Now, the problem is, of course, that takes a little hit, to keep all those calculations, Nothing's free, right? So, well, except for Wireshark. And don't we love that? Okay. And, but now I have more granular data to work with, all right? So, and I can also see from the perspective of the sender and the perspective of the receiver how long it took. When did they send it versus when did I see it in the capture trace file? Because a lot of times, we're somewhere in the middle. I'm not actually, sometimes I'm capturing at the client, sometimes I'm capturing at the server. A lot of times you just capture wherever you can, right? Because the world's not perfect, okay? So in Betty land, where the world is perfect, I love to capture by the server. I want to capture a lot of data, and I want to compare different clients and how they react, and how does that server handle it under load. But that doesn't mean that I can. It just means that's where I like to be, all right? So depending on where you're capturing, if I'm somewhere in the middle, now I can go ahead and look at those timestamps and use that information to see when did it leave the building, okay? So, alrighty, now, so I'm right at, 11:32, okay, there we go. So I'll go ahead and leave it up for questions, but there we go. Thus concludes the talking portion of the morning. All right, yay!